for arranging a seat for me after all these stand-ups. Well, the people have spoken last night, and we're delighted with the level of support for National. We see it as a vote for progress on the issues that matter to people, as demonstrated by the extensive debate in the campaign. So we now have the task of moving ahead to form a strong and stable government. Our senior ministers have met this morning to discuss the results and our approach to negotiations. I've spoken this morning also with Te Urua Flavel and David Seymour to thank them for their contributions, and particularly to commiserate with the Māori Party leader over the fact that the Māori Party didn't get back into Parliament. My staff are in contact with Mr. Peters' staff to arrange for an individual phone call, which we expect will happen in the next few days, and negotiations will begin from that point. Any questions?
What's your party's policy on the Māori seat?
That may well turn out to be a matter for negotiation as part of the coalition discussions, and there'll be any number of issues I know you want to raise. We are going to pay Mr. Peters the respect of negotiating with him rather than through the media.
No, I'm just asking what the policy is, because you used to have a policy of removing or getting rid of the Māori seats, which seems to have been put on the bench. So I'm not asking it in the context of negotiations, I'm just asking what your party policy is.
Well, as I think we stated during the campaign, was we had no plans to abolish the Māori seats. We effectively had changed the policy.
So that could change now, you seem to be hinting at that when you talk to the
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the discussions which we would have as part of the coalition negotiations. So that'll be, as I said, in this process, I would expect to talk to Mr. Peters, myself, to make the arrangements about how negotiations are going to be carried out, and we won't be doing it. We won't be taking public positions on issues which would be more appropriately negotiated directly with Winston Peters and New Zealand First.
Do you think the alternative government, as it sits with a one-seat majority, Labour, the Greens, New Zealand First, would be intrinsically less stable than New Zealand First National?
I think it's pretty clear cut that a two-party coalition would be more stable, because you would have a relatively narrower range of issues to resolve, and you could practically operate government with sensible communication. We'll be proceeding though with negotiations with New Zealand First to make sure that would be the case. And our position in going into those negotiations is that almost 1 in 2 New Zealanders supported National. The voters have given us the task of forming a government with New Zealand First, and that's what we'll proceed to do.
You yourselves have run a four-party arrangement now for 3 terms and had quite stable government. So it's not about the numbers of players necessarily.
Well, they're a rather different arrangement with parties of 1 and 2 at different times, so that's much easier to work with, and also more alignment across those parties.
Would ACT be part of the government?
No, we wouldn't expect so, no.
Are you considering calling the Greens at all for some kind of discussion?
Well, that's been raised. Look, the Greens have consistently ruled themselves out of discussing with National, and we would need to see some indication of interest from them in constructive discussions, and there hasn't been any indication so far.
Why will it take a few days to talk to Winston Peters so that we just pick the phone today and have a chat?
Well, as he indicated last night, he doesn't want to rush the process. I think we just got to bear in mind the practicalities here. This has been a very intensive campaign, a big night last night, and we want to get on with the job of forming a government, but we will work with New Zealand First essentially at the pace that they are willing to go. And as Mr. Peters has indicated, he also wants to move at a pace that respects the public's desire to get the issues dealt with and get a government formed so we can get on with implementing all the undertakings that were made and whatever comes out of the coalition agreement.
Last night you were talking about the importance of continuing the economic direction of the government. What are the implications of that for your talks with Peters? To what extent are you prepared to move away from the fundamentals of that economic direction?
Well, those matters that are going to be raised by New Zealand First, of course, we will negotiate with them rather than through the media. But I think the general point I made last night is one that I'd stand by. New Zealand's had some real economic success. We would want to negotiate in a way that seeks to preserve the basics of that success. And that'll be part of the discussion with New Zealand First, who I would assume are interested in ongoing economic success as well, even if there's some different views about how that's achieved.
What are the basics?
Well, that's going to be a matter. I think the basics of our management of the economy are pretty straightforward, but any changes to that are, matters for negotiation with New Zealand First.
Did your Chief of Staff ring the Chief of Staff of Winston Peters? Is that how the initial approach is made?
Yes.
Do you think there'll be pressure on you to change or do more on some key areas like housing or homelessness and health with the new term government?
Well, that's part of what we've campaigned on, I think, is consistent with the public desire for a stronger focus and more speed in dealing with housing issues, poverty, lifting the standards of our fresh water quality around New Zealand. And as I think you saw from the debate around those issues, we're in a good position to be able to apply some real momentum to those issues, and it will certainly be part of our planning over the next few weeks. I mean, while we'll be setting out to negotiate a coalition agreement, we'll also be looking at the implementation of the program that we undertook with the electorate and whatever enhancements we can make to that alongside whatever negotiation positions we come to with New Zealand First.
Is there likely to be much progress before special votes are in, given that they could make quite a difference to the makeup of the parliament if those couple of seats could change hands?
Well, it's possible that a couple of seats could change hands, but it's not going to alter the current balance much.
That sort of sense of there's only a one-seat majority on the left as opposed to there could be three-seat majorities.
Look, I don't think that would make that much difference. A national New Zealand First coalition would have a 6 or 7 seat majority, which is by definition more stable, but the balance of the votes is, plus or minus a couple of seats is now reasonably clear cut. It's not unusual.
Negotiating room when it comes down to that, when you sort of get around the table, who will be there?
Sorry, what's that? Sorry, I can't see you.
Who will be there at the table when you get down to negotiating?
Well, look, at the initial approach will be a discussion between myself and Mr. Peters. I think that's appropriate. And there'll be a discussion with him about how we're going to organise the negotiations. We're thinking that through now about the best approach, because we've had some experience of it, as has New Zealand First.
Would you have any objections to parallel negotiations? Him conducting parallel with Labor?
Well, we'd have to see what indication, some indication from New Zealand First that that's what they were doing. But in any case, we're going to proceed with a negotiation on the basis of a fairly strong position for the National Party.
That's basically just sort of like a series of meetings around horse trading, isn't it? If it's parallel negotiations, it's like, they've given me this, do you want to raise it type of thing?
I can't speak for Mr. Peters about what he wants to do. That'll be fundamentally a matter for him. I think our objective is clear cut. We want to set about forming a strong and stable government with a reasonable majority in the House. We've got a program that's pretty clear cut. We'll be looking at ours, we'll be looking at his, and proceeding on the basis that with a 10-point lead over the Labor Party, we're in a pretty strong position to be able to do that.
Have you cut ACT loose because just you don't need the third party, or as part of it the animosity between those two leaders could have been a barrier to actually bring them into a governing arrangement?
Well, I think it would complicate a governing arrangement, there's no doubt about that, and we can get a clear-cut majority working with New Zealand First. I've spoken to David Seymour. I think he understands how the numbers stack up.
Doesn't feel a bit shafted that, his party's supported National for 3 terms and now he's collateral damage?
We have to work with what the voters give us, and the shortest path to stable government is a two-party coalition between National and New Zealand First.
And if New Zealand First thought that David Seymour was in that arrangement, it would have been too difficult?
Well, it would just make it more complex, and I think you can see that on the other side of politics, a three-way coalition there with three weak, a couple of smaller units and a weaker Labor Party. That's going to be quite complex.
Do you think, are you open to governing arrangements such as Winston Peters abstaining on confidence in supply, without giving too much away about what you want to negotiate, but are you open to alternative governing arrangements other than a coalition?
We're open to arrangements that are going to, enable strong and stable government. Now, there's a number of different models have been tried in the past. In fact, most models have been tried through New Zealand's experience of MMP. So there's plenty of examples there to draw on. I don't want to make assumptions about what Mr. Peters would regard as his objectives or the desirable arrangement for him. That is something that we'll discuss when I talk with him.
What have you learned from the 1996 to 99 negotiations and coalition with New Zealand First? What did you learn from that?
Well, look, that was the first coalition under MMP, and I think everyone learnt a lot. In that one, there was, extensive policy discussions over quite a long period of time. I think we all realised that the public would now expect this negotiation to proceed quite a bit more quickly than that one, particularly because there's such a strong vote for National as the party with the most seats.
Would an abstention arrangement be strong and stable government?
Sorry?
Would an abstention agreement for confidence and supply fulfil the criteria for strong and stable government?
This is going to be a matter for discussion with Mr. Peters. We're not going to go into that discussion having ruled out any particular type of arrangement.
But you must prefer a confidence and supply to an abstention deal, surely.
Again,
if you're going to the public saying, this is a strong and stable government rather than one relying on an agreement to abstain.
Well, again, I don't want to make assumptions about where Mr. Peters or New Zealand First are coming from. That's why we'll get on with. Well, again, we're going to deal with the situation the voters have given us. I think myself and Mr. Peters are aware that the voters, having been reasonably decisive about the weight of seats in the House, will want to see us build on that fairly expeditiously to make sure that we get government that can continue with the significant progress they want made. I mean, in the end, forming a government is there to carry out essentially the will of the voters. I think the way that the votes have fallen indicates they want to see some real progress, building on the economic strength, and that's what we'll set out to do.
We have one more question, please.
Yeah, so could you just clarify who in the National Party has experience from the last set of negotiations and what role they played in those negotiations?
Well, look, you can look back at the history. I mean, we've got a number of people who've been involved in negotiations going right back to 1996, and of course the more recent ones with the other three parties. There's also on the public record, the coalition agreements that have been made each election, and they are surprisingly diverse for people who want to go and have a look at the arrangements. Each one of them has particular features that are unique. So we'll have that opportunity, we'll be able to draw on that experience, but as will New Zealand First, because they've been, they've been in a couple of different coalitions and no doubt observed the alternatives that are available.
If you end up in opposition, will you stay on as leader?
Well, we're not contemplating that. We got a strong vote. If we had, the vote that the Labor Party got, then we'd be talking about how to deal with opposition. But we got 46%, almost 1 in 2, better than people expected, and so we want to build on that position to form strong government, and we're not really contemplating the kind of issues that the other parties will be dealing with. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So were you involved in '96 negotiations?
Not directly, no.
Was he, was,
You'd have to ask him.
Was he there in 96?